We've got a very good group of panelists here today, and really my role is really just to facilitate the discussion. And I'd like to get a lot of participation from the audience as well. So please feel free to chip in at any time. You don't have to wait to be asked. Please feel free to participate. I think what we are looking at, we want to discuss in this panel is really looking at what's the relationship between property owners and the providers of Wi-Fi, and how does that facilitate the deployment of Wi-Fi more broadly? What are the questions, the key questions that needs to be asked or answered? And of course, how all of this is going to feed into the future work of the forum itself. So how does the forum start to play an active role if there are issues that need to be dealt with in this process? So I'm not going to introduce each of the panelists. I'll get them to do that and make some opening remarks, and then we'll start with some questions. So I'll start on my right here with Hayden, and then we'll go around. Can everyone hear at the back, more or less?
Thank you, Envir. My name is Hayden Lamberti. I work for Internet Solutions. I head up a division there called the Incubation Division, and we essentially incubate new products and businesses within the Internet Solutions brand. I've been focused very much on Wi-Fi over the last 2 to 3 years. With a number of initiatives in that space, and I'm currently looking after the Always On brand from a go-to-market perspective.
All right, thank you very much. I'm Karel van der Merwe from Wireless G. I'm the CEO of Wireless G. We operate as hotspot installers, owners, as well as we facilitate aggregation and integration to mobile operators. I think within the next 3 to 4 months, we will facilitate Wi-Fi access to about 70% of the mobile market, and talking about 2 operators out there. Yeah, that is basically.
And then Juanita from the FTTH Council.
Hello everybody, my name is Juanita from the FTTH Council. We're a lobby group for broadband deployment with fiber optic cables, with a focus on everything from FTTB, FTTC, whatever, and FTT to Wi-Fi.
And we've got
Justin Mitchell. I'm here to represent the property guys. I work for Growth Point Properties Limited. We're the largest listed real estate investment trust. And I've been working closely with Dimension Data Internet Solutions, specifically Hayden and his team, in the rollout of a smart building and smart mall strategy across our portfolio. It's been about the last 2 years, and they've subsequently been rolling it out with other landlords. Very exciting integration of Wi-Fi and fiber optics and everything telecommunication related, and then good old property management. So hope to share some experiences from that.
And I think that's a good point to start on, because I think just based on Tom's presentation this morning, which spoke about how venues and properties becoming more and more important in terms of where Wi-Fi is taking place and who owns the Wi-Fi. So he's talking about access to Wi-Fi being driven by venues. I think he said something like more than 50% of access was in closed venues, and I wanted to then ask all of the panelists, but particularly both Karel, who does some stuff around venues, as well as Hayden and I think what Justin's spoken about in the growth point, just to speak about some of the use cases and where each of the players sort of responsibility ends and begins, and where the customer sits in all of this. So who makes the money probably as well out of all of this.
So I mean, I think from my perspective, what we need to recognize is that the common denominator here is the man on the street, or the so-called consumer. That's the man who has money in his pocket, and that's the man whose money everyone wants to get, both service providers, telcos, property owners, and the property owners as tenants. So we essentially have an ecosystem of people that are focused around specific individuals. In my mind, I don't think that this type of ecosystem has evolved to the extent that it should have. I think we've made good inroads, and there's some good models. But the reality is, from a telecoms perspective, we have to appreciate the fact that landowners own the land where we need our networks, and without them, without some sort of cooperation between us, we're not going to be able to unlock that effectively. And yes, there's legislation in place which is supposed to help us, but the reality is that it is ineffective, so to speak, and it's much easier to work with the landlord to put a network in place as opposed to trying to force your way in there by banging the door down. So I think it's a very exciting space. I think it needs to evolve. I think people need to evolve their thinking in terms of where the landowner plays in this ecosystem. And the reality is, from a telecoms point of view, if the landowner decided they wanted to, much like COJ have decided they wanted to, they could do it all themselves and lock us out, and we just have to interconnect with them at the boundary wall, which is not what we really want, I don't think. So, I mean, that's just my point of view in a nutshell.
Thanks. Carl, are there any other points you'd like to raise as well around?
No, I think the most important thing, I believe that free Wi-Fi is a pie in the sky. I think it's a nice dream, and it will be like a dream. It's reality while you dream, but one thing is certain, you will wake up one or other time and the dream will end. What we experience in the real market without dreams is that it's not a profitable model from the venue side at this specific moment, to be quite honest. And the signal of that is that you suffer to get a financier who's really willing to invest in a decent carrier grade model. And so the question then is, who is willing to invest in? It is the company who really has a strategy and to provide service to his own consumers. Now, when you provide service to your consumers, the first thing that comes up is economies of scale, which drives the business model. I can't think that in 5 years' time or 6 years' time that you will get a single venue was really profitable. It will be a portfolio of venues over the country who might be profitable. In the mobile space, it's not the megabyte that the customer uses that is profitable. It's the one that the customer does not use that is profitable. So there's a few realities that we must talk about. The one thing is, free Wi-Fi wants to sell to people who can't buy, who can't purchase, who doesn't have money. There's no commercial model in it. It will only be a sexy free model until the sexiness of Wi-Fi and the flavor of the day is over and the politicians doesn't want to finance it anymore. Up till that point. So I think one certain thing that we can tell each other is we will sit here in 5 years' time and discuss a second round how we're going to commercialize this to give a piece for each and everybody who's in the value chain to make money out of. That's a certain thing that we will pass. Now, when it comes to venues and when it comes to property, what we experience is the capital layout increases. The reason for that is also not supporting a free model. The more people who use Wi-Fi, due to free Wi-Fi and due to adoption, the more people who use it, the more dense the usage patterns become, the more expensive the per square meter of deployment becomes, and the more you must rely on value-add services. When you start to rely on value-add services, you've got to invest more in order to enable value-added services. Customers has a trend to use more data, so the OPEX goes up. So at the end of the day, to conclude, I truly believe that the long-term model for Wi-Fi does not lie in a fragmented market ecology, but lies in a national footprint that belongs to 2 or 3 players with a huge customer base, with economies of scale, who use Wi-Fi as a bearer service or a real seamless service. And I believe that the mobile operators will walk away with a pie.
So on that point, I think we want to hold that thought, and I want to open it up to the floor as well. So we'll get back to Justin and Monita after that. Yeah, Seth, you want to?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll stand up so that you can hear. Yeah. Firstly, I would like to start with the point of the profitability side of it, as you've painted it, that the economies of scale is critical. Like anything, if you look at it that way, yes, like anything, economies of scale is critical. But if you consider the nature of Wi-Fi, which does not come in one big elephant size, it comes in hotspots at a time, one hotspot at a time. And therefore, the big picture perspective is not realistic. One, now, departing from that position, if you look at what was referred to earlier as market failures, which means in government's perspective, there's lack of ability or interest by private sector to provide the service and therefore providing it, then government funds it. So the question of viability is out of the window. So you'll find lots of those kind of things happening. And we're seeing a lot of political buy-in in some of the examples that are in front of us here, like Tswane, like Gauteng and so on. That's going to multiply. That's one aspect. Now, on the issue of profitability in terms of the retail location-based hotspots, if you like, I play golf. The TBS use this analogy. None of the golf estates will tell you that the golf section is making money. Never. They don't make money. But as part of a totality of a proposition, people want to live in golf estates. Are you with me? So even though the golf side is not making money on its own, but as part of a total offering, it makes the whole offering viable. So if you go to News Cafe and they have a free Wi-Fi, and you go there because you want to be able to be productive as you meet your buddies or wherever, and you buy booze, you buy coffee, you buy food, it pays for the offering, which on its own is not profitable. But the whole value chain makes sense to News Cafe and the provider. I just wanted to bring that perspective, just by way of differing with you.
Okay, so I'll take the two questions now. I just wanted to get to bring it both Monita and Justin on that, because I think what Zed is saying is I just wanted to understand sort of from the property perspective, is that what property owners are looking at, that is part of a package deal as opposed to it being a value proposition in its own right, that Wi-Fi itself is not a business, but it's part of your property portfolio services?
Absolutely. So I'll jump in here. And I agree with a lot of what Carl said. But for us, it is not about necessarily monetizing or free Wi-Fi. It's actually, we've actually taken a call that the moment you'll see that Always On provide half an hour or 50 megabytes of complimentary Wi-Fi at any Growth Point shopping center, and we don't want more than that, because we don't want the guy that doesn't want to spend money to sit in the mall all day and do nothing. It's actually about a holistic offering. For us, it's actually more about the analytics. The gentleman mentioned earlier about the analytics being the model as opposed to a consumer paying being the model. It's become about that for us. Is that Wi-Fi enables, from a retail property perspective, it enables, as we move into a digital age of e-commerce and understanding your consumer, we are able to use the Wi-Fi for micro-location-based analysis of the shoppers in the mall to enhance our active asset management of that mall, enhance the tenant mix, see where the dead patches in the mall are, and it goes a lot further than that. But that direction that's what we're interested in. It's not about whether we can get half an hour or 2 hours of free Wi-Fi and who can pay for it via advertising, etc., etc. Quite frankly, we don't want more than half an hour. We want a bit there as a value add to our consumers, but the guys that are spending a lot of money in the malls are happy to spend money on Wi-Fi, or if they demand it as a free commodity as their everyday lives, that's also fine. But we see it as it needs to be there, it's going to be there in all malls. and making money off the data itself isn't in our interest. For us, it's about the analytics, and it's about a much bigger holistic package. I mean, just to share a bit of the experience from what Internet Solutions did for us is they basically approached us with a holistic smart mall strategy that involved a fiber optic backhaul throughout, or spine or backbone throughout our shopping malls and through all our office parks, to ultimately provide an open access network that all of our tenants can have faster, cheaper connectivity, apparently up to a gigabit per second, and that was great for our tenants. And then on the back of that, that enabled then carrier-grade Wi-Fi, which maybe on its own wouldn't have been viable to install all of this fiber optic backhaul, but it was there for all the tenants. So carrier-grade Wi-Fi was installed, and then the guys, the upload speeds, our facilities managers were testing it, and they were getting upload speeds averaging about 35, 40 megabits per second, download speeds or whatever it's called for the guys who technically. And so our shoppers are able to do what they like on the network in the malls, and that's fantastic. But more importantly for us, we can use it for our own active asset management, and then we can pass it on to our retailers who are very, very interested in this. They can see through this micro-location activity how many people are walking past their shop, what is that conversion ratio in terms of people walking past their shop to walking into their shop, and how is that trend changing over time? How does merchandising impact that? So if a shop is doing well and then all of a sudden it starts doing worse, is that because the mall is suffering, or is that because, I don't know, the merchandising is bad? The same amount of people are walking past, but they're getting half amount of people walking into the mall. And that's what our retailers are very interested in. They're going to pay for that. And that type of stuff's got nothing to do with data, it's got to do with analytics, and those are the type of value-added services that you can get from the holistic, sort of smart mall infrastructure, which Wi-Fi is a component of.
Juanita, I wanted to come to you around just the issue around property owners and access, because I think you've been dealing with a lot of that as well, and sort of how that impacts on delivery, whether it's from the fiber side through to get to them. But I want to just hold on while we take the two questions. So if you can think about that, Salon, Juanita, and then I'll let you respond again, Hayden. I had a question here.
Just to follow up on what you were saying, in terms of having a wireless network in your properties, does it not also give you the scope to have increased revenues over and above the cost of having the network and running the network within your property? So in terms of your tenants now, will your tenants be willing to now pay more? Because I think that's what makes sense for you guys. If you can get a Wi-Fi network, what you want is some kind of realization and monetization element also from your side. Does it give you that element of being able to increase your rentals, decrease your kind of vacancies within your property, and give you that value add perspective? Because as a wireless provider, that's what I need to be selling to you ultimately. Because you don't just want to pay for something that's not going to give you value down the line. You want to kind of pay for something that you can also monetize on to someone else. And what I wanted to actually ask is, does that actually play out, or is that not really a consideration for you guys?
Absolutely. I mean, the way that we were approached, I mean, our specific case, we were approached with quite an attractive model where we could enhance, additional revenue streams. But ultimately, those additional revenue streams for us, it's in terms of our core business, it's very small, and we never want to lose sight of our core business, and we're not really there to milk telecommunication revenue. It's more about how do we benefit our core business, which you alluded to anyway, which is how do we benefit in our shopping centers, our tenants, our retailers, and then how do we benefit our shoppers. At the end of the day, that's where we get our bread and butter, and that's what we're interested in. So it's not really about additional revenue streams. But that being said, I mean, it has been packaged like that because it's a lot more palatable at first when you get approached with this fancy model, and then if there is an additional revenue stream as opposed to a cost, you will be very excited about it. But ultimately, it's more about enabling our tenants to do their job better.
Another question, and we'll get to Juanita. I think she's ready to explode. So just to get her to calm down a bit, and then we'll get Juanita.
So mine is not much of a question, more of a comment on different scenarios. And first of all, from a Justin perspective, with the property aspect, I think what we need to realize and appreciate is we're in an environment, a global world, a country that's got different types of LSMs. Do you understand? Data is expensive in this country, okay? From a GSM perspective, but certain LSMs cannot afford to constantly buy data. You know, that is why the City of Tshwane project is a very attractive one for a lot of people. I mean, let's be frank, a lot of black people are buying data and they don't have access to continuously catch multiple taxis to get half an hour. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect is there are multiple ways of making money, and I think Justin touched on around basically saying from a property perspective, analytics and data. So if you really want to monetize, that's where the next phase is from a Wi-Fi perspective is you'll be able to approach any retail, Woolworths and Edgar's and say, guys, we can share that information. Cities can use the exact same technology. Is to say, we understand from the city perspective, there's a lot of traffic in this area of the city. Going back to your point around from a rates perspective, you know, how do you clean certain areas up? But all I'm saying is, there is space for free Wi-Fi, okay? Because there's multiple ways to make that money back. You know, so I mean, if you, I don't know if anybody in this room travels. If you go anywhere in the world and you travel to, you go to a Starbucks. Starbucks sells you a cup of coffee at $7.99. If 10 people come into Starbucks, okay, and all buy coffee, you multiply that by 2, because the chances are they're calling somebody else to come sit and enjoy their free Wi-Fi. Just in a day, they've paid off for that access point. That's a reality. But the value add comes in when Starbucks is able to say, based on your point, so many people came into our store, okay, and so many people spend so much time in our store. That's very intelligent information that you know, essentially you can't get anywhere else, especially with the technology that we have now here on these devices that are literally always on, even. Excuse me.
It's waiting for that.
These devices are always on, even though we don't know it. You know, how often do you travel around and then your device just say there's a wireless access point? And it's that kind of space where it comes in. From a venue perspective, imagine if you were able to target JNB Med, Vodacom, and start basically saying, we have this data available for all the people that are coming to the event and are sponsoring the event. So I just want to keep it brief, but I'm saying we need to look at 3 different aspects of this. There's an LSM aspect, there's a commercial aspect, but there's also a value add aspect where everybody else can make money.
Okay, so I'll get to you, Mark. I'll get Juanita. I just wanted to just sort of that comment around the issue. I think Aiden also has very strong views. The issues that I think it's the discussion around free or not. I think it's around sort of who pays, and I think that's sort of the discussion around that. And as you're saying, it's sort of different models around who pays for the Wi-Fi, and I think that's where we start talking about the property. And I'll get to you. Can I give you a chance, Juanita, to...
Yes, don't interrupt. I think one of the things that I just want to say something to Justin, it is everything got to do with data. So it's not got very little to do with the data. The data is the value. So the data mining that you are privileged to have, which benefits your business and gives you an edge over your competitors, is because you've got access to the data that is being provided to you through these Wi-Fi hotspots. Now there's this term non-GLA revenues, which I really my hair stand on end, because not only is it not transparent, the tenants don't know what the cut is that the property management companies are making or what they are getting out of the telecommunications infrastructure that's being provided. And I don't have a problem with what property management companies are making. What I'm saying is that as an industry association, we are under tremendous pressure to bring down the cost of telecommunications. These fees are simply being passed on to the tenants. Now, in my mind, the value proposition is in attracting tenants because you've got Wi-Fi. So that's a very clear value proposition. So first and foremost, as a property management company or a property owner, there's your value proposition. Secondly, and this is mind-blowing stuff, the ability to mine the data that Wi-Fi hotspots can provide you with. Here's another massive value proposition. Should we still be paying and profit sharing and giving revenues away and getting the bleeding noses from government and the blue eyes because telecommunications is so expensive? But this pie is yay big. And it has been cut between property managers, property owners, private, public, paying for wayleaves. It just never, ever ends. Funding USASA, where's the gentleman who wants to know where the funds are? I also want to know. You know, where does all this money go? You know, and we take and then we fail the market. You know, so at some stage, yes, a lot of telecommunications companies are making a lot of money. But you know what? They're also giving a lot away, unfairly. And I just believe that there's space for transparency in where all this goes. What goes back into R&D, what goes back into extending the network, maintenance, NOx, the slice that local authorities are getting, provincial authorities. You know, what are we paying Sunwell? What are we paying all the other guys that have got a finger in this pie? And end users and tenants are completely oblivious.
I was in this small little shopping mall.
Okay, I'm going home now.
Thanks, Felicia. We'll let Mark and then Graham come in and then Aidan also want to do work.
One comment, one question. So the first comment is, mention was made, and I'm now moving away from the retail environments to commercial parks, office parks. I don't know if it's really within the ambit of the Wi-Fi forum, but when people talk about open access, it scares me because I've seen some open access models that are not open and are not accessible. So it's just something that worries me. Sometimes it's property owners rent seeking or managers rent seeking, sometimes it's people not understanding what their tenants want. A very brief example in a previous incarnation, a global customer of a global operator needed a local connection in an office park where one of the major operators had fibered up the office park. They would not provide dark fiber to the customer premises, which meant that the operator that had a global client for 47 country connectivity. South Africa was one of the only places where they actually couldn't deliver because the operator who fibered up the office park wasn't prepared to do a 500-meter dark fiber connection. Eventually they put a wireless link. And that's allegedly open access. So just a call. The second one is who then takes responsibility, now moving back towards the retail environment, who takes responsibility for security? And how do you convince people to actually switch on their Wi-Fi and connect to access points? Because I have a small inkling of the risks to myself and my data when I simply allow networks to connect, and how my device is screaming at every access point who I am, where I've connected previously, what my trusted networks are, the possibility of people spoofing those trusted networks if they're popular trusted networks, to pull data. Whose responsibility is that? Because I don't connect to Wi-Fi networks I don't know and that I don't trust. How do you overcome that barrier? Same way people tried with Bluetooth a couple of years ago in malls. Most people just said, I'm not connecting to you, I'm not handshaking. Go away, I'm scared of you.
Can I go? So, I think before we get Graham, if you don't mind, let me let Aidan and Carl also to respond, because I think both of you deal with those issues that Max raised now.
I mean, so there's, you need to have a look at, 100% agree with you. That is a massive risk, but that's what is being perpetuated with people expecting free. So I'm not an advocate of free. I fundamentally believe because we've built big networks, we have scale, and scale isn't actually what wins the battle, to be honest. Whether you build one more, you build 20, your unit cost per more actually doesn't drop. Scale is actually irrelevant in this conversation. Scale, economies of scope is very relevant in terms of the ecosystem that you can create around that infrastructure. And I believe that we can deliver that infrastructure profitably at a rate to the end user that is a fraction below what people are paying at the moment. When you get forced into free, you need to look for other ways to remunerate that network. And that is where we're going to see the dodgy argy-bargies that you're talking about. And yes, we can. We can get you to log on with Facebook. I can pick you up at the airport. I can, if you subscribe to that ecosystem. I mean, Always On don't run a network like that. Ours is a fully paid for network. But if you run a free network, and you need to trust your provider just like you trust the MNO right now. Your MNO knows you're sitting at Monte Casino right now. They know you've been here since 8 o'clock. They've got this data. You need to trust your provider that they're not going to use that information in an untoward manner. If you're giving it away for free, if you using a service that's free, like everyone said today, you are the product. And in my mind, yes, I think you can actually expect that something like that might happen, and you've got no recourse. People click accept. I accept the terms and conditions. No one reads it. Hey, throw away. We're on the network, and no one reads what's in there.
Sorry, if I could interact with this. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about somebody who, a criminal who names an access point always on because it's a trusted brand. Trying to convince me using a splash page similar to yours, trying to convince me to trust that network to actually then start collecting data as it transits the network.
So I mean that's when you look at that's a standards-based discussion when you start looking at Wi-Fi as a technology at a bits and bytes level in terms of how that's constructed, what the protocols look like, what the authentication looks like, and it's getting better and better over time. There are things that make it a little bit risky. Hotspot 2.0, when it eventually arrives, when all the APs are on the roofs and everyone's got the devices in their hands, will go a long way to alleviating that. That's not something that can kind of be solved at a commercial level. If you subscribe to the concept of Wi-Fi, then you understand that potentially those man-in-the-middle type attacks are potentially a risk. There's nothing any of us in the room can do besides lobbying with the WBA and the Wi-Fi Alliance for standards changes, which we do and are happening. There's not much we can do about that, and I don't think it's got anything really to do with a commercial model of Wi-Fi, personally.
Carl, is there something you wanted to add around? Just what do you do as a provider in a large venue, working with, as Aidan was saying, people that trust now a mobile operator? Can you offer the same level of trust to the consumer when they move from that mobile operator to the Wi-Fi network to address some of the concerns Mike has around it? Is it your responsibility, or is it the consumers, or is it the mobile operators?
Well, depends on what the relationships are, but it's always the owner of the consumer's responsibility, because it's his consumer who's going to have a problem with security, and if there's any risk, it's going to come back to the consumer, not to the venue or the network owner or whatever. So that might be a secondary risk, but the primary risk, 100% right, has all to do with the consumer owner. What we must remember, we're talking about a 200 billion mobile market here, not Wi-Fi, but a mobile market. And I'm not referring to a coffee shop here with a few megabytes and a few coffee shop here. I'm talking about on a national basis, when will Wi-Fi as a carrier service become relevant? That is what is important, and that is what's going to trigger the market. There might be a coffee shop here and a restaurant there and that, but that is just playing around, and there's a big sleeping giant in embedded Wi-Fi in 3G and 4G access points, small cells. It's a big giant lane. There's a lot of thousands and thousands of small cells out there with embedded Wi-Fi not activated, and that's something that we must take in consideration. It's also Wi-Fi for the future. Yes, there might be hardware providers who do make profit at this stage. There might be backhaul providers who do make profit at this stage. But when we talk about Wi-Fi as a connectivity service, it belongs to the group of mobile services on a mobile smartphone device. The consumer behavior will link in with mobile behavior. And when will that get critical masses? That will depend on the decisions of the consumer owner and what he's going to offer to them and how quick the market can provide a sustainable, reliable, security-wise, seamless model out there. That is.
No, that point. So let me get Graham in, and then Zeth to come and help it feed onto this. But
so my point was actually something that Juanita then raised after I put up my hand. But the point still sits there: is what is the right revenue share model between the landowners and the infrastructure operators? Now, what GrowthPoint seems to be describing sounds like a facilities leasing kind of thing. You've got a facility and you make it available to the operator at a certain rate, equivalent to what the cost of any other tenant leasing those facilities in your environment. But many of the property owners approach it from a pure revenue share model. And they have these expectations of percentage revenue shares that actually exceed what the profitability of these infrastructures are. And as Juanita said, that's pushing the price up instead of bringing us to a price that's more favorable to the consumer. So what is the appropriate model? How should we be doing it? Should we be allowing property owners to force this revenue share that's pushing, that's causing these services to be more expensive? There are a number of gated communities that some of us are aware of that have internal costing models that make them more expensive than even the big operators that have traditionally been the most expensive in the market. And you go into these closed communities where you're not permitted to install infrastructure, you're forced onto it, and in order to enable these massive profit shares, the price is too expensive. What is the right model between the operator and the property infrastructure owner?
So, I mean,
Envir, may I answer?
You asked the question, he's also asked a double question. From a property perspective, I'd also like to just clarify one or two things. Firstly, when I said it's not about the data, it's not about the data revenue for us. So from a GrowthPoint perspective, that's why I said it's about the data analytics. GrowthPoint took a decision that we're actually not interested in non-GLA revenue. We're not interested in revenue that's not our core business. We're interested in looking after our retailers and after our consumers, our shoppers. So it's actually, to answer the question very specifically, it's not about the data revenue for us. We're not interested in the telecommunication business. And let me answer this properly, because quite frankly, GrowthPoint has a very strong strategy on it. And I can also speak for a large part of the listed property sector in this regard. We're not interested in telecommunication revenue. For us, it's about looking after our retailers and looking after our shoppers. That's why I say it's about data analytics for us. It's about making our shopping centers more competitive. And it's about, in terms of the reason why open access, and that's why I love that question, the reason why open access is important to us, and our entire smart building strategy is all about true open access, because it's about dropping the cost of connectivity for our tenants. Because remember, our tenants can only afford to pay so much in terms of telecommunications, utilities, and rent. We manage our tenants' utilities for the exact same reasons that we manage their telecommunication costs, because if their utility costs soar, the rental pressures come. Same with telecommunications, and that's why open access is important to us. Nothing to do with us trying to diversify into a telecommunication space. So that's why it's not about data revenue for any true landlord.
But my point is that your viewpoint, in my experience, is unusual in the property market. I've come across far more landlords who have the opposite view. And it's refreshing that you have that view, but I'm asking more broadly.
And I think that's a good point that I want to capture as well, because I think that's part of why we're setting up this forum as well. Because I think it's part of sharing some of that best practice.
And one more figure, just to answer the question, 0.025% is the rented turnover that the mobile operators pay for their towers and their distributed antenna systems within the property space. 0.02% rented turnover. Average retail rented turnover is 7%. Do the maths. Revenue share, 0.02%. That's the split. We had an audit done across the GrowthPoint portfolio, where we went and worked out how much rent is being paid to a landlord across all of our buildings versus the turnover that those, and it's mainly in the shopping centres, the turnover that that infrastructure is generating. The answer across the average was 0.02%. That's the revenue share that the landlords are getting. So really a property owner in a shopping centre is not interested in small money.
The property owners are expecting sort of 20% of revenue as they share because they own the property.
Thanks, Graham. So again, as I was saying, so that's part of. So I've got Z here. So that's a point we want to take, because I think as part of what the forum wants to do around this, one is the sort of sharing of what's happening and what's the sort of good case studies that's out there that people can use across different sectors, and that can also help to ensure that there's sort of this level of transparency that we need to speak about. We get Z and then Jeff at the back.
Thank you. I just want to comment about the issue of maybe I don't get let's ask the question first. The issue of interconnecting Wi-Fi hotspots. I'm asking you in particular because you recently bought Envir, and they've got a product called Phone.
Yeah.
I just need to understand how it works in the context of the interconnection discussion for Wi-Fi.
So I can't actually speak on behalf of Envir in that regard. Internet Solutions bought our 3 divisions of Envir. The consumer division, the one that originally started with the little black box, that division remains. So we purchased the underlying infrastructure business, the Envir business, and the Envir Wi-Fi business, which we consolidated with the infrastructure assets of Always On. The FON network is part of Envir consumer division's go-to-market, and it's completely self-contained within that. I mean, I could give you my opinion on it, but I'm not going to, because I'll get into trouble. There are people in the room here who will be able to have that discussion with you, but when we're talking about our network, that FON network that sits inside the home of the consumer is absolutely extracted or excluded from the ecosystem that I'm talking about. So it's mutually exclusive.
The comment I wanted to make.
Okay, your comment, and then we'll get Jeff.
The comment about the economies of scale. Well, you spoke about the current latent capacity for Wi-Fi, which is latent as it's not used yet. If you look into the future and you interconnect the discussions we had today about Internet of Things and Internet of Everything, when your cars and your fridges and everything light up and join these Wi-Fi hotspots, then that's where your scale will come from.
I just need a point of clarity. I like the figure 0.026. I'm just curious to know how that is determined. You said it's based on turnover, what, the turnover of the entire mobile operator's revenue, or is that per base station? Because how you determine it from a single base station, I'd really like to see the math behind that, because
It's
0.02.
It's by intellectual property.
Sure. Before I give a technical answer about the methodology that was followed, there was a detailed methodology. Because I'm not going to go into the detailed methodology, I will just say that was followed, a very detailed methodology. And it's very easy to say, oh, a landlord is the reason why the end consumer costs are so high. Very simply, go look at the margins on the income statements of your mobile network operators, and you realize the monopolies that we have in our mobile network operators, and that's why we've got high consumer costs. Not because landlords are the evil genius behind why we have X times higher mobile rates. Quite frankly, yeah. And in terms of the actual methodology, I'm happy to discuss it offline. I mean, there was a very detailed, and Hayden would be able to give a lot more details on that. And Jim sitting in the crowd here, there, guys, we actually outsourced a lot of those services, and they did some detailed calculations around that. And there was a very happy discussion that was had between the mobile network operators and all the various landlords, just to standardize a sort of a way that mobile network operators can have access, as is their right, to property, but how that's managed. And basically, cut a long story short, a very productive outcome was found. That Vodacom and MTN and Celsius were very happy with, and quite frankly, we're happy with, because our shoppers, we need them to have the top connectivity, and they need to have the towers for consumers.
Okay. So on that, as the conversation's heating up, unfortunately, we have to wrap up. So, so I wanted to just allow panelists a opportunity to make a few closing remarks, and in those closing remarks, just try and bear in mind some of the things that you think would be useful to take forward in a forum like the Wi-Fi forum as it goes forward. That will help shape either working groups that should be established or some other form of useful role it could play.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a little naive in general, but I fundamentally believe that there is a very pragmatic ecosystem-based approach that can be taken here, where people aren't trying to profiteer, where they're working in conjunction with the same, they're working together with the same end goals in mind. If a telecommunications provider is working with the landlord who's going to push up the price, the landlord's going to have a dead asset on his hand. You just need to be persuasive enough to bring them on that journey to say that you're both working towards the same goal, and allow them to see the value proposition in a way that makes sense to them, where they're not going to try and I know it's absolutely not possible, because I've also dealt with some shockers. It's absolutely shocking what's out there. I do believe the more that things like this happen, when Justin stands up at the retail congress and has a conversation about what's happened and what we've done, that changes perception. This forum changes perception. I do think it's going to get better and better the more we share, and the more we kind of show the success stories in terms of what the outcomes are.
Thanks. Carl.
Right, thank you very much. I think the model is going to be driven by a few factors that will result at the end of the day in consolidation. You can go and look at models in Japan. KDDI decided a few years ago to start with Wi-Fi, the mobile operator there, and within 2-3 years they rolled out 2 million hotspots and took over the market in 1-2 years' time. I believe that the old saying is that profit has the bad habit to follow the shortest routes to the highest return on investment, will at the long run determine where the value chain will end up, how short the value chain will be, and who will be the role players in the value chain. That is just a normal financial mathematics that will drive this market as well. The second thing, I think, like I said, the ownership of the value chain will change, even the ownership of the equipment and the infrastructure on the sites. It might be that real estate owners in 2-3 years' time get an offer from mobile operators or large companies, we will do it on your behalf, take over the networks. That might happen. Even if it is a cost center, the chance is higher that it will be done that way. Economies of scale is a fact, and a force in the market that determines profitability and returns on investment. The flow of capital investment will follow that route as well. And we must compare apples with apples. Like I said, if you are a restaurant owner and you want to know whether you can do Wi-Fi, yes, you can do Wi-Fi. But if we talk about the share Wi-Fi is going to enjoy as a percentage of telecommunications spending in this country, I think the rules of economy will determine the flow of capital.
Thanks, Juanita.
Quick one. I think the Wi-Fi forum has got a massive role to play, but I think it's critical that we engage with more stakeholders. Today we voted on Growth Point here. Where's all the other property managers? After our discussion, it seems like Growth Point actually plays ball in the other ones that are squeezing the 20% out of revenues. And until such time as we start seeing telecommunications as a utility, there are no models to determine the profitability of water and sanitation services to your tenants. Therefore, there should be no model to determine the profitability of your business that telecommunication services provide to the tenants and to the end users. And that's what I am.
Thanks, Justin.
I agree with that telecommunication is a utility from a services perspective, and that's the way it needs to be managed in property. And then obviously the dynamic with Wi-Fi specifically in retail property, I reiterate, it's all about big data analytics for the retailers, and that's what will monetize that, but that's a very small piece of the pie. And in closing, I'm very interested to hear Carl's view on where Wi-Fi is going with the mobile network operators. It's going to be very interesting to see if they are able to carry on owning the consumer, or there can be a bit of disruption.
Perfect. Thank you. So I'd like to thank the panelists for their time, their insights, the audience as well. And we look forward to continuing the engagement with the forum going forward. So